Red dust curled and swirled around the border market, a place where people bought horses, sold guns, and sometimes even sold other people. Amid that noisy crowd, an Apache woman was dragged into the center of the market. She was tall, her muscles rippling under sun-darkened skin, her black hair hastily tied back, her eyes bright like flint. Neola. Next to her, an old woman shot her a contemptuous glare. "She cannot bear children," the old woman said coldly. "Keeping her is just disgraceful. If anyone needs labor, name your price." The men burst into laughter, some tossed empty bottles, some whistled. One man called out mockingly, "How much for this mare to pull my cart?" Neola clenched her fists but said nothing. The wind snapped her torn skirt, revealing strong calves and a long scar running like life's own blade across her skin. In the crowd stood Silas Ward, a widowed rancher with pine sap on his shirt sleeves. He did not leer like the others. When the bidding began, Silas stepped forward and laid a pouch of coins on the table. "I am not buying a person," he said, his voice rough like a saw cutting wood. "I am taking her with me." The crowd fell silent. A few scoffed, a few stared. But Silas never looked back. He threw a leather coat over his shoulder and nodded toward Neola. "Come on." "At my place, no one has a price tag." Neola stood still for a moment, then gave a small nod. As they walked away from the market, the wind picked up, carrying sand and whispers behind them. For the first time in many years, she felt like she was being led away as a human being, not dragged off like a piece of cargo. The road away from the market stretched on like it had no end. The sun beat down on cracked earth, the horse snorted heavily, and dust clung to their shoulders like a second skin. Neola sat in the back of the wagon, her hands loosely tied, her eyes locked, on the back of the man walking ahead. He had not said a word the whole way, only turned back now and then to ask, "Are you thirsty? I can handle it." He handed her a water flask, old, dented, and scratched. Neola took it, drank slowly, her gaze still wary. In this land, kindness often hid a trap. But his eyes, they were not like the others. By sunset, they reached a wooden house tucked between pine trees. Children's voices floated out. 5 kids, thin, tangled hair, faces smudged with dirt, stopped playing when they saw a stranger. A small boy whispered, "Papa." "Who is she?" Silas set an axe down by the door. "Someone who needs shelter." Just for a while, the children looked at Neola, then at each other. Their eyes were wide and nervous, like deer startled in the dark. Neola just stood there, tall, scarred, unsure where to place her heavy hands. Their first dinner was quiet. The sound of spoons hitting tin bowls felt like wind scratching across a rooftop. She held the bowl awkwardly and spilled some soup while bending down to clean it up. Silas said gently, "It is all right. Everyone fumbles a bit when they are new." That simple sentence, nothing grand, tightened her throat. How long had it been since someone spoke to her without a trace of contempt? That night, Neola could not sleep. She stepped out onto the porch. Before her stretched dry land, scorched grass, and a few rotting logs left from an old garden. She sat down, her hand touching the soil, dry, cracked, and cold, like the heart of someone long cast aside. Behind her, Silas came out, holding an oil lantern. "There used to be flowers there. My wife planted them. Has she been gone long?" 6 years. Went with our youngest. That winter the snow came early. They sat in silence for a long time. Wind whistled through the pines, blending the scent of sap with lantern smoke. Silas spoke softly, his voice low but kind. "If there is something you need to do to forget the past, do it. There is still land here. Do not be afraid to start again." Neola lowered her head, and in her heart, for the first time in many years, a tiny seed stirred, fragile but real. The next day, Neola began waking up early. She built the fire, hauled water, and wiped down each old wooden plank in the house where wind hissed through the cracks. Her hands were large and calloused, yet when they touched things, there was a rare gentleness. The children still watched her quietly. They avoided the gaze of the towering Apache woman, seeing more of a warrior than a mother in her. One morning, the youngest girl dropped a bucket of water. Neola bent down, picked it up, and smiled. "It is all right. The bucket will be full again. Just like the land will bloom again. The little girl's eyes widened. Then she gave a small nod. From then on, the children began following her into the garden. They watched her work the soil, water each small bed. Whenever the wind bent a tender sprout, Neola would quietly stand it back up and say softly, "What falls, if still alive, will grow again." Silas stood on the porch, silently watching. He saw his children begin to laugh again, the kind of laughter that had disappeared with their mother. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Silas stepped out onto the porch and saw Neola sitting alone in the dry garden. "Are you doing all this just to forget?" he asked. "No. I am doing it to remember that I can still live." Her words left him silent. The night wind carried the scent of damp earth, blending with smoke from the wood stove. In that moment, he realized some people do not need to say much. Just their presence makes the land around them feel less barren. A week later, the first green shoots appeared. The children shouted with joy, and Neola just smiled quietly. Silas whispered almost to himself, "You are not just bringing this garden back to life. You are bringing this whole place back to life." Neola said nothing, but in her eyes, the oil lamp reflected a soft, flickering light like a drop of water in the desert. That rare thing people call hope. The days that followed passed quietly. The morning wind drifted through the pine forest, carrying the scent of sap and mist. The steady sound of Silas's hammer echoed from the yard, while Neola's soft singing floated from the kitchen. She taught the children an Apache song melodies that sounded like wind weaving through canyons. The children did not understand all the words, but they loved the gentle rhythm. When they laughed, Silas would stop his work, lift his head, and for a moment, the house truly felt warm again for the first time in years. One afternoon, Silas returned from the woods, brushing against a dry branch. Blood trickled down his sleeve. Neola saw it and immediately stepped forward. "Sit down. It is all right, just a scratch. You should not keep doing everything by yourself." She washed the wound with warm water, then crushed herbs in her calloused palm. The scent of sap and smoke filled the air. Silas looked at her hands, rough but steady, and found no words. "Where did you learn all this?" "From my mother. She taught me that if the earth knows how to heal, then people should learn to do the same." The children huddled quietly by the door. When Neola finished wrapping the bandage, the youngest asked softly, "Papa, is she a warrior?" Silas smiled, his eyes gentle. "No, she is someone who makes the land bloom." That night, the fire crackled in the stove. Laughter returned to dinner, and as Neola told stories of the mountains where she was born, Silas realized her voice held a rare kind of warmth, a warmth that came from deep within, not just the surface. Before bed, he stood on the porch and looked out at the garden, now dusted with green. He spoke quietly, almost afraid to hear himself say it. "Thank you, Neola. You brought this whole home back to life." Neola, watering the flower beds, turned and smiled. "No, Mr. Ward. This home saved me." Above them, stars shimmered as they fell over the pine forest. There, in that dry and rugged land, two quiet souls found one another not through promises, but through the smallest of things: a meal, a wound, and a smile. I am truly grateful to have you here. If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and the echo of hooves in your heart, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit together again. And I will tell you another tale from the West. That year, the drought came early. It was only early June, yet the wind was already dry as burning coals. Wherever it blew, leaves dropped like rain. The ground cracked like scorched leather, and the well held only a few buckets of murky water. Neola still woke at dawn, hauling water from a far-off stream, watering each flower root with hands that bled. The children helped her, singing old Apache songs as they carried the buckets. One day, Silas returned from town, his face coated in dust. "The traders came again, did they?" Neola asked. "They did, offered double." "And what did you say?" "I told them, this land is not for sale. Not when you and the kids have poured your sweat into bringing it back to life." Neola smiled, but a shadow of unease stirred inside her. 3 nights later the fire came. The sound of screaming horses, howling wind, and the crackle of dry wood filled the night. The entire garden lit up like a sea of flames. The children screamed. Silas ran out, and Neola, without thinking, grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around herself, and ran into the fire. "Neola, get back!" Silas shouted. "No, we made a promise to this land." She pushed through the burning shrubs, trying to save what flowers she could. The firelight lit up her muscular frame, revealing a raw, untamed strength, fierce and beautiful. But the thick smoke brought her down. Her eyes stung, and her breath broke into ragged gasps. Silas rushed in, pulled her from the flames, and held her tightly in his arms. "You are out of your mind. You are going to die for this garden. If we do not protect it, then I am just someone to be sold again." Her words struck him silent. He carried her inside, laid her on the wooden floor, and with trembling hands, held her sun-darkened palm. That night, the fire slowly faded. The garden was reduced to ashes, but inside the little house, the children sat around Neola, clinging to her hands, whispering, "Mama Neola, do not sleep, Mama." Silas bowed his head, his voice hoarse in the dark. "You did not just save the garden, Neola. You saved all of us." Outside, the smell of smoke and sap hung heavy, like a vow. Across the field of ashes, the hot wind blew the dust away, but somewhere, in that charred ruin, one tiny green shoot reached for the sky. The next morning, mist hung low over the charred remains. The garden was silent, like a grave. Neola sat on the porch, her hands wrapped in bandages, fingers swollen from the burns. The children huddled quietly around her, their faces streaked with ash, none of them saying a word. Silas stepped out and sat beside her, setting down an old shovel. "You could rest for a few days. We will start over later." Neola looked out at the ashes, her eyes deep and steady. "No, if we wait, the earth will die for good. We start again today." He said nothing. She spoke as if she had nothing left to lose. Yet her voice carried something that made people believe. That afternoon, the whole family returned to the garden. Silas dug, Neola tilled. The children picked through charred wood. With the well dried up, they hauled water from a stream half a mile away. Each bucket poured onto the soil was like breath given back to the land. Word spread across the region. People from nearby, some who had once looked at Neola with suspicion, began to arrive. One man brought seeds. "I heard you are planting again." "That is right." "Then, let me offer a few." One by one, they came, some with seeds, some with water, some with their hands. And under Neola's strong, steady hands, the garden began to live again. One morning, when the first green shoots pushed up from the ashes, Silas placed his hand on her shoulder. "Look, the land has chosen you." Neola smiled, a simple smile that shone like early spring sunlight. "No, Mr. Ward, the land just needs someone to believe in it." That afternoon, as the children watered the beds, Neola looked around at the once strange faces now smiling back at her. And for the first time in years, she felt warmth inside her chest, like she was no longer someone who had been sold, but someone who was needed. That night, beneath a pale moon, Silas looked out at the reborn garden and said quietly, "Maybe fate did not bring you here to work, Neola. Maybe it brought you to teach us how to live again." She answered softly, her gaze rising to the star-filled sky. "No one comes back to life alone, Silas. Just like no land turns green without many hands helping it grow." The wind stirred the new leaves, and the scent of damp earth rose rich into the air. In the wooden house beneath the forest trees, for the first time in years, the children slept deeply. And out there, in the garden that had once burned to the ground, life had begun to breathe again. That autumn came late, but it came gently. Golden sunlight spread across the leaves, and the garden Neola had rebuilt was now so lush that travelers passing by would stop just to admire it. Wildflowers bloomed brightly along the wooden fence. Bees buzzed, butterflies fluttered. The laughter of children danced in the breeze, while Silas stood at a distance, quietly watching it all. A man who had once lived by saw, axe, and solitude, now finding his heart filled with something soft and full. One afternoon, the town held a harvest festival. From afar, the Ward family was invited. The children were excited, but Neola hesitated. "I do not think they will want to see an Apache woman there." Silas smiled, adjusting his worn leather hat. "If they see the flowers your hands have grown, they will understand." When they arrived, the crowd went silent at first. Whispers floated through the air. "That is her, the woman who was sold at the market. the Apache woman living with Ward's children. But then, the children ran into the square, holding bright bouquets from Neola's garden. They placed them on the festival table, and the colors were so vivid, everyone had to stop and look. The village elder stepped forward, his voice rough. "These flowers, where did they come from?" Silas answered, "From burned land, brought back to life by her hands." The crowd fell still. Then a woman stepped forward and placed a loaf of bread in Neola's hands. "For the one who made the land live again." From that day on, the way people looked at her changed from doubt to respect, from caution to admiration. And in the middle of the festival night, as folk music played, Silas turned to Neola, watching her in the firelight. "You remind me what it means to be alive." No one else could have done that. She smiled softly, her eyes glowing like a warm oil lamp. "And you, Silas, remind me that kindness still lives on this land." They said nothing more. On that western night, with the wind carrying the scent of ripe corn and the laughter of children, the two stood side by side, not needing vows, not needing paper, just the peace they both once thought they would never find. From then on, the townspeople called her Mama Neola, and the Ward homestead became a place people came to see not for the land, but to visit the garden of the Apache woman who was once cast aside, now the very soul of the town. 3 years later, the spring wind swept once more through the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh pine wood. The garden in front of the Ward home had become a small paradise in the middle of the dry lands, flower beds thick as waves, bees buzzing joyfully, and the old wooden fence wrapped in lush green vines. Silas leaned on his hoe, looking toward the porch. Neola was watering the plant's broad shoulders, sun-darkened arms, but a face full of peace. By her feet were 5 children, now grown, one carving wood, another painting on an old board that read, "Ward's Garden." From afar, townsfolk now visited often. Some brought seeds, others simply came to sit quietly beneath the trees and listen to the wind. No one whispered the woman who was sold at the market anymore now. They called her by a much softer name, Mama Neola. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the mountains, Silas walked over and handed her a bunch of wildflowers. "Today marks 3 years since the day you arrived. And not once have you ever regretted it?" she asked, with a teasing tone. "Regret?" he chuckled, his voice low like forest wind. "Only that I did not meet you sooner." She smiled, her dark eyes shining. Silas's large hand took hers and held it tight. The two stood in the garden, once ash and ruin, now blooming like an eternal spring. "Mr. Ward," Neola said softly, "that day, I thought I was being bought, but it turns out I was being saved." "No, Neola," he replied. "We were the ones who were saved." The children came running, wrapping their arms around their parents, laughing. Their laughter rose with the wind, drifting across the fields like an old song of the West. That night, they sat around the fire. The children asked for a story, and Neola told one in her warm voice, about a woman who had once been sold, about a garden that died and bloomed again, about how kindness can take root even in a desert. Silas sat beside her, his gaze gentle like moonlight glinting off her thick black hair. Outside on the porch, the wind stirred the flower branches. And in that moment, it felt as if everyone understood this was the home they had been searching for their whole lives. Dear friends, a home does not need to be grand, it just needs someone waiting at the door. A place where children's laughter dances with the crackle of firewood, and rough hands find their way back to tenderness. Family is where the storm stops at the doorstep. It is the quiet corner of the world when everything outside feels too cold. In the arms of those we love, even the lost can find their way home again. It has been an honor to share this story with you. I truly wish you and your family health and happiness, wherever you are in this world. I love all of you, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment down below. Press 1 if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next gripping story from the Wild West.